Right. So that 25 years ago would have been 2000, I guess, one or so. And I was at the time teaching high school in Philadelphia at a small Christian school. And when I saw it initially, the lights came on because I was seeing it in the hallway. Everything that documentary was saying about boys, I saw with my ninth graders. And in this Christian school, which was right down the street from Westminster Seminary, it was called Philmont Christian Academy. And this is what I saw. We saw girls who were diligent and had a plan for their future. They were driven, they were conscientious, they were all those things. And the boys, we noticed, were literally walking around the halls with their heads down and their shoulders slumped over. So another teacher and I noticed this, and we said, something's wrong. And we said, okay, we're gonna launch a men's Bible study Wednesday in the lunchroom, in the art room, adjacent to the lunchroom. So we opened it up. We said, okay, we have a bunch of guys here that we know are struggling. We'll open it up, and then they will show up. The ones that we thought were going to show up did not show up. The ones who were struggling the most weren't in terms of who showed up, they weren't the boys from broken homes, bad neighborhoods, etc. The ones that showed up were the elders' kids, the pastors' kids, the Christian businessmen's kids, the missionary I mean, and we were like, wait, what? And basically they were so downcast because they didn't know where they fit in terms of the education environment, because it really did cater to girls. And so that's when I began to see that the entire educational environment really was structured for the success of girls. And that boys were always getting in trouble because they were being boys. Sitting in class, not paying attention, distracted, throwing things, right? Drawing dragons and picking up sticks and trying to hit each other with them and making weapons out of pencils and stuff like that.
Right.
They were always getting in trouble because they weren't acting like the girls in class. And what began to happen over time is you slowly begin to see a preference for girls and disinterest in a lot of boys. Now, what you also saw around the same time, not to digress too much, but this is also sort of the peak of the punk ska emo movement at the time in Philadelphia. Bands like Oasis were popular, Everclear, Linkin Park, like those sort of bands were also popular. And the sorts of content that they were singing about in those songs, like Champagne Supernova, for example, by Oasis, I saw it with my students, right? That song, Champagne Supernova, by Oasis, is actually a song about boys who were wanting their parents to intervene in their delinquency. So it's a lament. That's why there's a phrase in the song that says, "Where were you while we were getting high?" It's a song of lament because they wanted their fathers, in particular, to tell them to stop smoking weed. Right. So when Raising Cain came out, it just connected all the dots, and I just saw it so clearly as a teacher and also just working in churches in the youth space.
Wow. As somebody who classically never listens to lyrics, as soon as you said those lyrics, I could sing them in my head. I knew exactly what they were, never put it together. Everclear certainly had some very strong lyrics about absentee fathers and kind of the delinquency problem that follows from it. So I remember watching this. I'll just be completely honest. I remember watching this thinking, I can't believe they're showing this on PBS. Because it just seems so overtly, I think at the time I thought, this is so anti-feminist. It would be, and this is the mood of the day, because I remember feeling like we can't affirm boys' thoughts and feelings, or the ones that most boys, on the average, have and feel and think. And it was it was jarring to me. Do you know any of the backstory behind this documentary? I never looked into it. I made my Sunday school teachers, I made them all watch this, and because it impacted me so deeply. But I'm not even sure where this came from, besides
Yeah.
this book.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a book first, right? So that's a red cover, Raising Cain, and the book was at the time was such a splash because it came on the heels of a lot of books about masculinity in the mid to late 1990s.
Yeah.
So we often talk today about the sort of crisis of men and boys, but this isn't. This is sort of round 7 of the crisis that we've had since the Industrial Revolution. We also had the same sort of manosphere, macho masculinity discussion, crisis of boy discussion in the mid 1990s. We were having the same discussion. Promise Keepers came out of that whole discussion. And basically, because we've been talking about men from essentially mid 1990, 95, 96 to about 2000, no one had talked about the boys. And so we were having this discussion about men struggling, and then this book said, wait a minute, the boys are struggling too.
Hey there, if you've benefited from this content at all, please hit the like and subscribe, or subscribe and like, one of those or both of them together on this video. It helps us tremendously with the math algorithm nerd monsters. And men there, when you say men in the 90s, we're really talking about boomers, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then, so what the data was showing is that the children of the boomers were also struggling as well. And there was all of this new interest in what was happening to boys because we were beginning to see them fall behind. I mean, today we have all the data that boys trail girls in every subject, at every school, at every grade level. Women are getting the majority of college degrees. Women get the majority of all master's degrees and doctorates, etc. But that was beginning to happen in the late 90s and early 2000s. So this book really dropped at a critical moment when that discussion was happening. And I think at the time, people didn't believe it. I remember this. I mean, I remember having discussions with people about the crisis of boys, and it was like, boys are fine. They're not struggling. And the evidence, by the way, of boys not struggling, they would point to C-suite executives and say, well, look at all the men who are CEOs. So the boys are doing great. And we're all saying...
That's your typical boy in the world.
Right. And we're saying, we're saying, hey, are you actually in schools? I mean, are you on the ground seeing what's happening in schools? This is also the time when the ADD, ADHD spike began to happen in terms of diagnosis for boys. You had all these sort of cultural streams happening, and this book brought attention directly to boys.
And he was, saying some things that I think at the time didn't seem to be so obviously true. I mean, I remember one section where he just talks about crying, and crying being a natural part of being a young boy and a man. And yet even people who might claim to be sensitive to the issues of boys and girls were in very casual, unbeknownst ways, shaming young boys for crying, and like not having this full range of emotional life. I mean, I've been claiming for years, you might be able to correct me, is that men are not less emotional than women. They spend their emotional energy in different places often, but men, at least American males, certainly Brazilian males, spend a lot of emotional energy on football, sports, etc. But I don't think I had ever heard a case from a psychologist who was using data for why young boys actually have this full emotional life that it's being neglected, and then how that's harming them, until I saw this documentary.
Yeah, it's actually, boys are more emotional than girls. In fact, the infant brain of a boy requires more interaction and engagement than an infant girl. There's a famous experiment that was done. You may have heard of this, where they have moms in front of toddlers. I'd say I think they were maybe between 12 and 18 months. And so the mom stands there for a couple of minutes, does the sort of goo goo gaga stuff, makes eye contact, teases, touches, tickles, etc., and then walks away. Same thing with the boys, right? Mom's in front of girls, little baby girl. She's doing this, walks away, silence. Boys, 3, 2, 1. Ah! I mean, they lasted maybe 10 seconds. Right. And so from a developmental perspective, boys require a lot more interaction and engagement. And when there's any sort of neglect or there's any sort of even abuse, it actually affects boys' brains differently than girls early on during those first 36 months of life. Boys require much more interaction than girls. Their brains develop, as we know, that frontal lobe develops much more slowly. And it really, the other thing that was interesting, that this sort of came on the heels, and this is part of the context here, this sort of came on the heels of the AIDS crisis. So what happened in the late 70s to the 1980s, there was there's a scholar at, I think he's at the University of Bristol. He's in the UK, but he coined this term homohysteria. Because what happened in the late 70s through the 1980s and early 90s, basically fathers were told, inadvertently taught, and some taught directly, that if you're too affectionate with your son, if you're too emotional with him, if you let him show his emotions, then he'll end up liking boys. And there was massive amounts of neglect and touch deprivation that happened in the lives of boys, particularly coming out of the AIDS crisis. And so there was this idea that, boys can't show emotion because that's not masculine. Right?
And this is all response to, because AIDS had highlighted it started in the homosexual community and was always more promiscuous or more rampant in the homosexual community. And so adult men were really keyed into, well, I don't want my son to be homosexual, and I don't want to be the cause of that, is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. I don't want my son to be effeminate. I don't want him to walk like a girl, talk like a girl, have the emotions of a girl. He has to control those, so he can't cry, he can't complain, he can't, right? He doesn't need hugs, and I'm going to put him in football. So the other thing that happened, sort of two things happened in the 80s. One is that there was a massive spike in viewership of NFL games and a massive spike in fathers putting their sons in football. The third thing that happened, which to me is quite tragic, is there was a shift out of the arts for boys. So music, theater, chorus, those sorts of things. I mean, I'm old. And so when I was in high school back in the 80s, in the good old days, it would not be uncommon to have a football player or a basketball player also be in the choir.
Absolutely.
Right.
Or be in the musical theater production. Right.
Absolutely. Right. Today, not going to happen. Not going to happen. Theater kids, band kids, when I was in high school, those were also athletes. Right. And when I was in the marching band in the fall, basically the track athletes and baseball players were also in the band. Right. In the spring, when football season was over, we'd have football players also be in the band, et cetera. So if you think about that in terms of the sort of cultural markers of how we define what masculinity was for boys, it was characterized by do not act like girls.
Wow.
Right? And so if there was any sort of indication, both with either fathers or peers, then that you were presenting any sort of emotion or anything like a girl would, it was just completely shamed.
So I could go on for about another hour and listen to your insights here, but we do need to wrap it up. Going back to Raising Cain, exploring the inner lives of boys, it sounds to me, pulling together many of the things that you're saying here, that when a church or a Christian community is really focused on, well, just get them saved, right? Like that's get them to stop masturbating and just get them saved, right? Like the two key purposes for a youth group.
Drinking and drugs.
Yeah, drinking, drugs, sex, that kind of, keep, as my wife says, like the worst sin she could have possibly committed, in her Southern Baptist church community was getting pregnant. And like, that was known, like that was the worst possible thing you could do. So keeping them from committing these deadly sins as they might be viewed, and then making sure they're saved, right, that they have this trust in Jesus. If those are your only goals, then kind of a lot of the things that you're saying don't matter as much, or they can get it put on the back burner, and the win is still like, okay, well, at least they know Jesus, and they're not pregnant, or something like that. And it sounds like you're really, a lot of what you're doing is saying, well, A, that's not the biblical model, and B, exploring the inner lives of boys, which is what that Raising Cain subtitle is actually kind of what the church's task is, and that's an intergender exploration, that's a intra-family exploration, not just boys, of course, of daughters as well. And a lot of this is the outsourcing of that work or the failure to do it, if I hear you correctly.
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe has been missed over the last 120 years of American Christians trying to discern these things is not paying attention to the fact that boys develop internal lives where they're asking really big questions about who they are, what their role is in society, what their role is in the church, how to handle their emotions, the good ones and the bad ones. How do you handle disappointment and anger and passion? How do you handle those things? So one of the things that has not happened, because we've been so keen on this minimalist approach of making sure that they know the gospel and that they behave a certain way, they're actually still drinking milk at 18, 19, 20. And then we toss them out into the world and they implode because those other parts of their life and their world were never developed spiritually. They don't have spiritual emotions. They don't really have really mature ways of thinking about their future. They don't really know about marriage. They aren't thinking about what it means to be a husband. They aren't thinking about how do I be a Christian employee. They aren't thinking about those things. They actually have not been trained on how to handle disappointment, right? Like, imagine this. Imagine being 18, 19, 20, and you've never had an experience being tutored on how to handle disappointment or how to handle anxiety or depression or insecurity or doubts. How do you handle all the messages you get all day long about who you should be and why? Like all those sorts of things, nothing. And so they get out and they have no deep resources to learn how to do those things. And in today's era, they go right to YouTube to try to figure it out. Right? Or they try to find some guru.
There. Happy to tell them.
They try to find some guru on Instagram, or they follow someone's TikTok account to do that. And that's exactly, and this is a whole nother podcast discussion, that's exactly how Jordan Peterson rose to prominence, because of the void of addressing the other parts of what it means to be a whole person, right? And again, the Bible does this. The Bible talks about the whole person, not just the spiritual side, not just behavior modification, but everything. I mean, the Psalms, for example, is a great book about the emotions, like how to handle emotions, right? But they don't get trained on those things, and they're sheep being sent into wolves because they're so underdeveloped. One of the things I've told parents over the last couple of years, and I'll end with this: what you really want are you want self-confident kids who are wise. That's what you want. You want children who are confident enough that they can say no to invitations to do something stupid because they don't care about rejection.
Wow.
Right? So when my 9th grade student told me that his dad is his best friend, what it really meant is if his friend said, hey, let's go get drunk, he's like, I'm not going to go do that. And they're like, well, then you're out of the group. And he's like, well, I don't care. I have my dad, right? So if I don't get included in your group, it really doesn't matter because my father still accepts me and my father still loves me. And I do not want to disappoint my father. Therefore, I'm not going to do what this group is doing. You got to have that kind of self-confidence in order to exercise wisdom, right? But we're not building up that level of self-confidence in our kids because that self-confidence comes out of the home, and it comes out of the relationship that kids have with their parents. You want self-confident kids who are wise. If your children excel in wisdom, if the book of Proverbs is literally a part of the neural synapses in their brains, they will be fine.
Right?
Right?
That's a very powerful word picture. The wisdom and acceptance and disappointment development. Okay, I literally could go on for another hour. You're a good friend and colleague, and it's amazing to me. I've known you 15 years. And I never, ever tire of listening to you, which I would not say about most people I've known for 15 years. So,
well, you're
very
very
much.
kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for being on, and thank you for your wisdom.
Thanks for having me.